Life is good and death is bad. A lot of you might say, Burger, that seems like a pretty obvious statement to make, my dude. And you'd be right. Hence, imagine my surprise at the fact that I still have to make this statement. And imagine my additional surprise at the fact that there are people who disagree with me on this. That's right, this is a video on transhumanism and immortality. To give a little bit of context, it has become clear that for the first time in human history, biological immortality is now actually legitimately on the horizon. As we have focused in the past decades and centuries on maximizing the human lifespan as it is biologically possible, which is something that, though we still have a lot of problems to solve, we have almost perfected, much of our research is switching over to extending that maximum lifespan altogether. Of course, it's not as simple as that. These two things do go hand in hand. They work off each other, they work with each other. An advance in one field will lead to advances in the other. However, we have only recently started to actually divert serious resources into making the human species negligibly senescent. Organizations like SENS, the Buck Institute, Sierra Sciences, and the Methuselah Foundation have been popping up since the early 2000s, and they have done significant progress on their quest since then. Estimates on when we will actually achieve biological immortality vary wildly, but experts seem to agree that if you make it to 2050, you'll probably make the cut. And though 2050 does sound fairly far away, you might think, come on, biological immortality in 3 decades? That sounds a bit absurd. And you'd be right to say that. We're not going to have biological immortality by 2050, probably. We might, I don't think we will. We will, however, have the ability to extend our lives significantly by then. And then, when you have an extended life and you can live longer, you will make the cut for the next milestone that extends life even further, and further, and further, and further, and so forth, until eventually you do reach biological immortality. This will be exacerbated by the fact that we continue to see an increased speed in the research of new technologies. New technologies for research and data sharing will be available. A lot of billionaires will have an impending sense of dread and also see that possibly they can become immortals, and also we will have scientists at that point that are well over 100 years old and understand their subject so well that we couldn't even imagine it. I mean, a guy who spent 150 years researching one thing is gonna know a lot about that one thing. But even if it's not 2050, biological immortality will eventually become a thing, whether it's 300 years from now or 30 years from now. You don't believe me? Well, I want to try a little experiment with you and see how I can maybe change your mind. I'm going to ask you 2 questions now, and I want you to put down your answer to these 2 questions in the comments down below. So question number 1 is, do you believe that humans will achieve biological immortality? Question number 2 is, do you believe that humans will achieve faster than light travel? You'd be surprised at the amount of people who say no to the first question, but yes to the second one, even though biological immortality is well within known science, whereas FTL travel is not. In other words, we do know that there are immortal organisms like the Hydra, and organisms with negligible senescence such as tortoises, Greenland sharks, and lobsters. And there is no biological or chemical or physical or otherwise reason to assume that biological immortality shouldn't be possible. And on the other hand, everything we know about the universe very strongly suggests that FTL travel is completely banned. And even FTL transfer of information is completely impossible. All the loopholes that we have thought up over the years have either never been observed or rely on things where we do not know if those things even exist. Yet somehow, we're more inclined to believe that FTL will be possible than biological immortality. And I have a theory as to why this is the case, right? You know how you have a difficult time imagining friendly robots that will serve humanity without trying to take us over? Or mining the sun? Or putting a literal huge space station ring around the entire Earth? The reason for this, I think, is that none of these things have been explored in popular media or sci-fi to any large degree. They are fairly rare concepts in the vast majority of sci-fi franchises, whereas things like FTL travel and teleportation and all that, are very common, even though they are probably not possible. And whenever immortality does make it into popular fiction, it's always associated with some grave cost. Maybe you have to murder people and drink their blood, or you lose all of your emotions or your free will, or some other thing that has absolutely nothing to do with actual biological immortality. And honestly, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, living in a society where nobody ever wants for anything and everybody is biologically immortal isn't very relatable to the day-to-day experiences of the people of the 21st century. Sure, that kind of media exists, some of it is even popular, but it's always tied to some other things that are unrealistic. So basically, there is no reason to assume that biological immortality cannot be achieved within the lifetimes of people that are right now under 40. So let's instead talk about a sentence that always appears under every single video about immortality, and which makes me very angry. But I mean, come on! Even if you eliminate aging and disease, you're not gonna live forever, so what's the point of immortality? Imagine, for a moment, me standing behind you right now with a gun to your head. And I ask you the question, do you want to continue living your life and me just leaving? Or do you want me to shoot you in the head right now, ending your life immediately? Yeah. Didn't think you were gonna pick that. Can you now understand why people might want to live for longer than 100 years? Are you a fan of joint pain, loose bowels, and memory loss? No? Well, can you now imagine that maybe people want to stay young longer? No serious transhumanist has ever suggested that actual perpetual existence in eternity, real, true, complete immortality, will ever be possible. Because existing forever is not even possible in this universe. Entropy will get to you anyway. Thing is, we still live in a very young universe, and that shit is still hundreds of trillions of years away. That is a time span so unfathomably enormous that no human that has ever lived has ever been vaguely able to grasp it. That is a time span so long that it contains 10 million immortalities and then some. We call it immortality because it essentially amounts to being immortality, and no bullshit semantics argument can change this fact. You could still get hit by a truck and die, unless you're some kind of special cyborg, or maybe medicine does some incredible advances in the coming years. But no amount of medical nanomachines is going to save you from a supernova. All the time I see people who are vehemently against the concept of biological immortality pretend as though that would make them unable to ever die, and they would have to endure the agony of existence in perpetuity. There is literally no reason to believe this whatsoever. This is just some bollocks mental gymnastics that these people do to justify their irrational love for death and hatred for life. I am here to tell you today that no, if at any point you decide that you want to pass away, nobody's going to stop you from doing that. Nobody's going to force you to take the immortality treatment in the first place, or continue to taking the immortality treatment at any point, because why the fuck would we do that? Whatever reasons you have for not wanting to be biologically immortal, great, have it. This is like gay marriage. People getting gay married don't have any effect on your life whatsoever unless you also choose to get gay married. So no, transhumanists are not infringing upon the sanctity of life, just as gays are not infringing upon the sanctity of marriage. You can still do what you want. I don't care. And I shouldn't have to mention this, but I see this exact comment on every single video on immortality that anyone has ever done. Well, I don't want to be immortal. All the people that I love around me would just die and I would keep on living. That would be super sad. It's like, have you not thought this through for even a second? Why would you be the only human alive who gets the immortality treatment, you actual moron? Another favorite of mine is, well, if you never die, why would you ever have the motivation to do anything at all? And here I really have to ask, do you do things solely because you're afraid you might be too dead to do them one day? Personally, I don't approach life like that. I do things because I want to do them. I write stories because I want to write stories. I make YouTube videos because I want to make YouTube videos. I eat exotic foods because I want to eat exotic foods. I learn new languages because I want to learn new languages. And there are a million other things that I cannot do as of yet, and which I am working toward being able to do. Will I ever run out of things that I want to do? I don't think so, but it may well happen. In 1,000 years, in 2,000 years. It's entirely possible. And you know what I can do then? I can then choose to die. In all seriousness though, if the only reason you do things is because you're afraid of death, you maybe should rethink some parts of your life, because I don't think that's a very healthy mental state to be in. But let's talk about some actual real problems that actual real immortality technology could actually really create. And while we're at it, let's also solve them real quick. Because yes, there are problems attached to this, but they are by no means insurmountable. Let's talk about the obvious one. Overpopulation. I mean, there are just too many people in the world at this point anyway, right? You don't have enough food for everyone. A good plague would just fix a lot of humanity's problems. This is a sentence that edgy nihilists have repeated so often that people have just started believing it, even though it's not true. Don't get me wrong, overpopulation can, in theory, become a problem, and we need to work on eliminating that problem before it arises. However, we have been doing this since the inception of the human species. All we have done throughout all of human history is create new technology and optimize the way we live so we can support larger populations. Right now, we do have sufficient resources for pretty much everyone in the world to live a decent life. This wouldn't be a life like in the first world we have right now, but to a lesser standard, but we could in theory make that happen. It's a distribution problem more than anything else, and though the West has been seeing an increased amount of wealth disparity and inequality, it's globally been getting a lot better. With advanced technology, we could potentially support 1 trillion humans on Earth, and quite comfortably so. People who make this argument really like to pretend that technology will just sort of stop advancing in the very near future, and because we are incapable of supporting 1 trillion human beings today, we will never be able to do it ever. You know, much like today we are not capable of splitting the atom, and we are not capable of curing polio, we are not capable of flying airplanes, we are not capable of using steam engines, we are not capable of making cheese. Because there was a point earlier in time where we didn't have the ability to do those things, and therefore we never developed the ability to do those things, because it is literally impossible to develop the ability to do things. All the things I mentioned earlier about science advancing in speed in the field of immortality research also would happen to every other science, right? All of those 100, 200, 300, 600-year-old scientists that know a whole lot about a very specific field would exist in every field. And here's the big thing about technology, because people always like to say, yeah, well, your technology can be as good as it wants to be. At some point, you're going to run out of resources. Well, I have one word for you. Space. No, seriously, space is the miracle cure that will solve all our problems. It's very difficult to wrap your head around the absurd amounts of just invaluable resources that are just flying around in space, and the incredible ease of access with which those could be harvested. Literally, the sheer quantities we're talking about here are almost impossible for a mind that has grown up in our resource-scarce world to imagine. Once you have achieved the basic space infrastructure of being able to build ships in space, which is not that far away considering that we already have permanent structures in orbit, and we have already been to the moon, and we have sent probes to a lot of bodies in the solar system. And once you gain the ability to mine asteroids in space, or planetoids, or other planets, you basically eliminate all resource shortages forever. Yes, it is really that unbelievable. At that point, you can just ship people off into massive space habitats, in addition to your underground, underwater, floating in the sky, and swimming on the ocean cities that exist on Earth. You don't even need planets at that point. Planets are pretty cumbersome to colonize. We might do it because we can. We probably will do it because we can. We don't need to. You just strip mine an asteroid, put a cylinder habitat in there, done. Fucking done. 100,000 people now have living space and green areas. The point being that even if tomorrow everyone was offered immortality, overpopulation would become a problem more quickly, but it wouldn't be so quick that we couldn't defeat it. Especially considering that at that point, we'd have a really strong incentive to defeat it. A lot of people would still die because they get run over by trucks. A lot of people just wouldn't take the treatment because of whatever reasons they have. And a lot of people would push back having kids by a century or two. Side note on the people living in the asteroids, popular sci-fi likes because it needs to have relatable and cool storylines to portray it as though the people who live in the asteroid belt would be destitute, enslaved miners who are victims of powerful Earth corps who exploit the belt for its resources. But really, they're gonna be the richest motherfuckers in the solar system. Here's how crazy this is, okay? There are small asteroids, and a lot of them, that contain more gold than the entire Earth. And to get shit from space to Earth, all you need is a parachute. The only serious argument I have ever heard against immortality that actually does make a lot of sense is the hoarding of resources and power. You know, billionaires and companies that just become so established that nobody can do anything about them and they can essentially do whatever the fuck they want. And politicians that just get elected in perpetuity because, you know, they don't die. But once again, people like to talk about this as though it's some insurmountable problem, as though no person on Earth has ever had the alien idea of term limits. It becomes especially disconcerting to think about a private profiteering megacorporation controlling the drug that makes people immortal. I mean, imagine the power that such an entity would have over the world. The thing is, almost all immortality research at this point in time is either done by corporations that have an ideological motivation to bring immortality to everyone, or, and this is most of the research, non-profits. Antitrust laws already exist, and this is a very easy problem to foresee and an even easier problem to fix. And even if a private entity were to develop the cure for death, governments and people would be very quick to make sure that they cannot have a monopoly on that technology. They would still be selling the most valuable resource of all time, but they'd have to do it with competition on the open market. Plus, there's just no point in subjugating the poor. Resource scarcity will not be a problem at that point. You don't need to control them as workers because machines do all your work, and you still need people to sell your shit to. And if you have more customers that don't die... That being said, I can very much imagine that if the immortality treatment that comes out is one that is very complicated to administer, a lot of people just wouldn't have the money to be able to afford it. However, because this is probably the most sought after good of all time, there would be an almost infinite demand for this. Economies of scale and probably also government aid in many countries would resolve this issue more quickly than we might imagine. So at this point, the only people I expect to see remaining in the comments are the ones who go, "You just don't want to die because you're immature and you're afraid of death, even though death is a completely natural part of life. And you should eventually die, man." Yes, congratulations on realizing that this makes me extremely angry. And also saying that, oh, this is just your death coping strategy that I'm attacking, and that is why you're getting angry. All you do is define the psychological phenomenon of what is happening. And yes, you are attacking my death coping strategy, which is literally not fucking dying. Just, you know, be aware that for every moment you push back immortality research with your words and actions, you are directly responsible for the deaths of the people who die in those moments that would have otherwise gotten the treatment. If you're willing to accept that, in your infinite wisdom and maturity and respect for the natural order, I'm sorry to say this, but you're a massive asshole. Thank you very much for watching this video. Do all the things with the video that you would do with the video. Instead of giving me money on Patreon, we are getting into a really hot phase. I will be gone for the second half of next month, but I will make announcements regarding this soon. Follow me on Twitter, get on my Discord server. Thank you very much for watching once again. Have a fantastic day wherever you are. And that spirit, I love you all, and see you around, cunts.